Hi, I'm Femi OK.
I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
Today, as part of World Press Freedom Day, we take a look at how the United States, the Philippines and Hungary try and silence journalists. But first, we turn to the recent attack on journalists in Afghanistan. Malika, you have that story.
That's right, Femi. A dark day. That's what many are calling the blast on Monday in the Afghan capital, Kabul, that took the lives of 9 journalists, rushing to cover the scene of an earlier bombing. The attack, which injured at least 49 others, including an Al Jazeera cameraman, was later claimed by ISIL. The country ranks as one of the most dangerous in Reporters Without Borders' 2018 World Press Freedom Index. These are just 3 of the faces in the latest attack on press freedom in Afghanistan. Farishta Irani, the only woman among the journalists killed this week. She was the producer of Woman, a program on the radio station Azadi. Salim Talash, a reporter for Mashal TV, sent a text to his friends warning them away from the scene of the earlier bombing. He died when the second bomb exploded 30 minutes later. Mashal TV's Ali Salimi accompanied Talash. He joined the station a week before the explosion that took his life. Tragically, they weren't alone. Afghan TV network Tolo News confirmed the death of its longtime cameraman, Yar Mohammad Toki. One TV News Afghanistan mourned the loss of their reporter, Ghazi Rasuli, and cameraman Nowruz Ali Rajabi. An Azadi radio station shared the photos of their journalists, Sababun Kakar and Ibadullah Hanazai. And the AFP news agency shared a collection of photos from their chief photographer, Shah Marai, also killed in the blast. The Kabul attack received widespread condemnation. Afghanistan's National Security Advisor tweets, "My sincere condolences to the families of victims and the press family in Afghanistan and around the world. Terrorists can't choke press freedom and people's voices with such attacks." Well, the same day, one more journalist was killed in the eastern province of Khost. And before the attacks on Monday, an Afghan journalist was shot dead in the city of Kandahar. On Thursday, as we commemorate World Press Freedom, we remember the loss of these journalists. As the UN Deputy Special Representative for its mission in Afghanistan tweets, "The pain of your loss is exceeded only by the determination to continue your work." Hashtag Afghanistan mourns. Femi.
Thank you so much, Malika. We head now to Hungary, where press freedom is becoming increasingly challenged. The country dropped 2 spots to 73 in the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index. Prime Minister Viktor Orban's ongoing crackdown on independent press has reshaped Hungary's media landscape. His government has been accused of systematically targeting opposition voices through economic pressure and intimidation, eliciting repeated warnings from the European Union. Joining us to discuss this in New York, we have Margot Ewan. She's the North America Director with Reporters Without Borders. And in Budapest, Hungary, Szabolcs Vörös is a journalist with the conservative weekly magazine Heti Valos. It is good to have you, Margot. Good to have you, Szabolcs. Szabolcs, I'm going to start on your Twitter feed. Let's have a look at this, everybody. No comment needed. Hungary was ranked at 73rd place on the 2018 Reporters Without Borders Index, behind all of her European neighbours. No comment needed. I'm going to push you, Szabolcs, here. What were you thinking when you first heard that about your own country, being a journalist?
Well, of course, if I had to be strict, I would say this is nothing new, because my country is on a slopey way on RSF's Press Freedom Index. Let me just remind the audience that in 2010, when the current government came into power, my country was 23rd on this list, and now it's on the 73rd. So that requires no comment. As I wrote last year, as you mentioned, we were on 71st place. So this sloping down is nothing new, but of course, said update.
So you mentioned it is an update and the sloping down is nothing new, but I wanted to share this comment from Balint on Twitter. He says, "Government critical press outlets that are able to stay afloat without government ad money operate relatively undisturbed. Bigger issue is independent media acquired by oligarchs and used to push propaganda. It's a lost battle. He goes on to say the impact is already there. The only news most voters in the countryside can easily access is hate-filled propaganda. And this played a huge part in Fidesz's re-election, which of course is the ruling party of Viktor Orban. What do you make of his comments there, that the impact, you're already seeing it?
Well, I think this tweet is a bit exaggerating the situation, which is harsh at the same time, I would say, because it's true that government oligarchs are now currently owning exclusive access to the regional newspapers. They acquired them in the last years. They are really influential outlets to reach the public in the countryside. But on the other hand, if you look on the online sphere, it's open, it's accessible. So if one takes the trouble to go online, they can find critical voices, critical messages. On the other hand, as well, these outlets are struggling with financing because they cannot get access to government funding. So that's a hurdle to jump over, but the sentence or the statement that countryside people can exclusively access government-controlled media is simply not true.
I'm online right now. I'm looking at the Hungarian Free Press. Margot, bringing you into the conversation here. The headline here says, Press Freedom Index lists Hungary as problematic. What do you mean by problematic? Unpack that for us.
Well, it refers to an area in the Press Freedom Index where we rank certain countries based on their score. And given that Hungary has fallen considerably in the past couple of years, it is in now the category called problematic. And that is because, as your guest so put it, there is less and less media independence, less and less pluralism of voices in the country, and it's becoming more and more polarized due to Orban's control over many different media that are pro-state propaganda, but also this problem of oligarchs that are pro-Orban's government buying up some other media outlets, which means that there are few independent news sources left. Many of them are online. But it does polarize the debate in the country, and it's really concerning for a country within the European Union for this to be happening. And so that's why we consider it problematic.
So I hear what you're saying there, but I want to posit this. This is from someone on Twitter who might disagree. This is Steve Valentine. He says the media is fully independent in Hungary. All media is available in Hungary. People no longer buy the liberal media publications. Hence, some have had to close their doors. They have literally run out of other people's money. Szabolcs, I'll direct that one to you. He's saying this is just about independent media companies, or liberal companies, as he calls them, not having the money to continue.
Well, that's partly true, but of course, I would say that's the other side of the scale. It's another exaggeration. So if you look on the market numbers, it's clear that independent outlets, as well as other newspapers, televisions, radios, are in a problematic environment. But what Margot said is, well, I have to agree, of course, because this is problematic. The trend is problematic.
Yeah. Szabolcs, let me just ask you this one thing. I know you were curious because we have Margot here and we're almost at the end of your segment. You wanted to know how you ended up bottom in the whole of Europe in terms of their Press Freedom Index. Margot, can you explain that to Szabolcs very quickly?
Well, of course, for us, it is this groundswell attempt to eradicate all independent media voices that are opposed to the Orban regime. And for us, for Reporters Without Borders, Hungary is the worst example of this. Of course, we have a similar trend that's going on in Poland right now that we're watching very closely, that we hope would not produce the same results as it did in Hungary. And so that's why Hungary is the worst performer in the European region in our index.
Szabolcs Farishta, thank you for talking to us about the media landscape in Hungary. We are going to say goodbye to you, but hold on to Margot for the rest of our programme. We head to the Philippines now. The country dropped 6 spots from last year, landing at 133 on the Press Freedom Index. In 2017, 4 journalists were killed, making it the deadliest country in Asia for members of the media.
Hostility towards the press comes from the top down. The country's president, Rodrigo Duterte, routinely lambasts the media. In 2016, shortly before being sworn in, he warned journalists that they are not exempted from assassination. And earlier this year, he revoked the license of one of the Philippines' leading news organizations, Rappler, a publication that's been fiercely critical of him. Joining us to talk about this in Manila, Natasha Gutierrez. She's a Southeast Asia correspondent for Rappler. Welcome to the stream, Natasha. I want to start with this tweet because we've gotten a couple of ideas from our online community on why the Philippines may have dropped on the list. Jaime here says safety is always a concern, given the number of cases of journalists murdered in the Philippines that go unsolved. Rappler is being used as a poster child to the media should they become critical of the Duterte administration. It is pure intimidation. What do you make of his comments?
Hi, thanks for having me. Well, we do agree with Jaime, and we've, ever since the beginning, said that when the first government case was filed against Rappler, we instantly called it harassment. At this point, there are 8 government offices after Rappler. They've targeted Rappler for various reasons, from libel to tax evasion, of course, all unwarranted, we believe. And it's, to us, clear and pure harassment, and something that sort of we expected after months and months of attacks towards Rappler and our critical reporting of this administration.
I'm trying to work out, Natasha, what it was that you're doing, what it is that Rappler is doing that's getting under the skin of President Duterte and his administration. A couple of examples here. Propaganda war, weaponizing the internet. This was a multi-part series about propaganda. Can you tell us what kind of reaction you got to this series?
I think the first thing we want to clarify is Rappler is the first and only news outlet in the region that is owned by journalists. So already we are independent. We're different from all the other news outlets. We're not owned by oligarchs or businessmen, and we're independently owned. We're journalists who own this news outlet, so we're not indebted to anybody. And when we do stories like this, the propaganda series talked about fake news, talked about the hate speech, and mapped the networks that were behind it, which pointed to the administration, then obviously that angered the president and the government. Stories like this, like the impunity series, which talks about the drug war, critical reporting on the issues under this president, we understand the frustration of this administration. And this is exactly why we found ourselves under attack. But at the same time, this is why we need to keep on reporting critically, even though it is getting harder, as is shown by the Press Freedom Index and our drop in it.
Well, Natasha, I think it is journalists like you that our next Twitter commenter has in mind. Z says, you've got to admire the grit and courage, especially of Rappler's female journalists who were turned away by palace and event guards, attacked on social media by government supporters, even probably receiving death threats. But you don't see them changing their style of reporting. Margot, broadening this out to all of the reporters at Rappler and other places in the Philippines, what is it that your organization saw as troubling here that caused them to drop?
Well, really what we see as troubling in the Philippines is it's the deadliest country in Asia for journalists, with 4 killed in 2017. And actually a couple of days ago, a local radio journalist was gunned down after leaving a recording of his show and later died from his wounds. And authorities investigating that death believe that he was directly targeted for being a journalist. So we see in Philippines this top-down anti-media rhetoric, which is quite violent, that actually gets translated into physical violence against journalists. And that's what's so concerning to Reporters Without Borders. And particularly with the case of Rappler, we know that Maria Ressa has herself received death threats of rape, things that are specifically targeted against women journalists, things that have caused us to be actually greatly concerned for the safety of Rappler's CEO and their staff. And so we've actually alerted the United Nations to this issue as an urgent concern. One of the many urgent concerns Reporters Without Borders flags when there is safety of journalists at stake. But for the Philippines especially, an ally of the United States, to have their Duterte saying all the time derogatory remarks against journalists, but also saying that they might deserve to be killed, referring to them as SOBs. That's really what we see as the driver behind some of this violence and also this online violence and this culture of cyberbullying and trolling that seems to come directly, trickling down from the state.
Natasha, I'm just looking at a tweet that you pinned at the top of your Twitter feed, and it's from January of this year. A sad day for democracy and press freedom. We at Rappler received the kill order revoking our license to operate, the first of its kind in Philippine history. This is a clear, distinct attack on media by government. We won't allow it. And then when I'm looking for Rappler online, I see it. I see it for today. So you're still operating, you're still doing journalism. How are you fighting back?
Yes, we are. So that decision came very quickly, unusually quickly. It took 5 months for them to decide to revoke the license. Normally, and in the past, companies have been given the chance to explain their side. That was not given to us. That right was not given to us. And if we were closed down by the government, we would be the first news outlet to be closed down since the dictatorship of Marcos. So that says a lot. How are we fighting back? We filed a case. We filed our appeal. We're just waiting to hear about that decision. Normally, that would take a few years. But again, we don't know under this administration. It could be rushed. They could come out with a decision tomorrow. And aside from this case by the Securities and Exchange Commission, like I mentioned earlier, there are now 7 other government offices aside from the SEC that has targeted Rappler. So if we do survive this particular case, we're still facing a tax evasion case, a libel case. Again, like I said, all unwarranted. So we're fighting back with critical reporting, with information, speaking to TV shows like you or online shows like you, and continuing our campaign for press freedom. And we're hoping to increase awareness about this issue so that everyone can see sort of what's happening or the decline of press freedom here in the Philippines.
Natasha, keeping that in mind, we got this from Stability Surge, who says we need to think about not just the ban, the potential ban on Rappler itself, but what further consequences it might have in the future. And I think this applies globally in truth, this person says. What are you planning?
That's exactly why this is not just about Rappler and the government. It's actually about the government and press. And again, there could be a chilling effect. We're already seeing this. Any sort of words that come out from the president is then amplified online by online hate speech. Again, the Philippines, you have to note, is the #1 users on Facebook. So you can sort of imagine how toxic it can get here in the Philippines. So yes, that's exactly what we're arguing for, and that's what we're fighting for, that this isn't just about us. If we get closed down, it's a precedent that could happen.
Sure.
That could set a precedent to what this administration is capable of doing. And this government has also attacked other news outlets, although they've been targeting us. So again, if they succeed in closing us, we don't know what could happen after that, not just in the Philippines, but also in the region. If they can see that this is possible in this day and age, then what would stop other leaders from doing the same?
Natasha Gutierrez is from Rappler. She's the Southeast Asia correspondent there. Thank you for joining us here on the stream. And now we go to the United States, the home of press freedom, where despite constitutional protection, journalists have faced increasing attacks over the past few years. It is one reason the US dropped 2 spots to 45 on the Press Freedom Index.
President Donald Trump is often critical of the media and routinely uses the term fake news when describing news coverage as a way to discredit the press. And journalists have faced the risk of arrest or assault for covering protests or simply asking public officials questions. Joining us to discuss this in St. Louis, Missouri, Mike Falk, a reporter with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Welcome to the stream. Mike, I wanted to share a video comment that we got from a member of our community on this topic, especially when it comes to the U.S. And I want your thoughts on this. Here's Noah Millman, a columnist at The Week.
Thankfully, in the United States, there hasn't really been direct interference with freedom of the press as there has been in Hungary. Hopefully, there won't be. The bigger problem is that the dramatic decline in public confidence in the press and the rise of partisanship has given an opening for political actors to effectively avoid the press as a check. And I don't know what the solution to that is within the current media ecosystem, where all the incentives line up to encourage the media to be only more partisan.
So Mike, we're just diving right in there. He talks about incentives to encourage the media to be more partisan. He doesn't see this ending positively. Given your story, what do you make of his comments?
I believe, I don't know how that, some of that relates to my story. I do think as far as the market for partisan media is absolutely maybe at an all-time high. You see that when the political center of the country has moved, and I think journalists see it in their regular reporting when they are talking to someone either on the left or the right who more or less takes certain questions or certain facts and reporting as being somehow inherently against them. The nation is more polarized, and as a result, you're seeing industries like media be subject to some of the more hostile consequences of that kind of political climate.
Mike, let me share a little bit of your story with our audience. This is you. Someone was sued by a journalist who was arrested, pepper sprayed during a protest, and then this picture here. What happened? Just briefly, recap the story for us.
There had been an entire day of protests. It was the third day of protests following the acquittal of a St. Louis police officer, a white police officer who had been accused of shooting an unarmed black suspect. He was not convicted. And obviously here in St. Louis, the issue of inequality, police violence, whether or not everyone is viewed equally under the law, has been an issue for a long time. No one has forgotten Ferguson, and this certainly, I think, sprang up from the embers of that incident. The first time I showed up to these protests on the first day, I was accused of being an undercover police officer by a protester. On the third day of protesting, it was mostly peaceful, and then after the official protest ended, there was some violence in that there were some windows broken, flower pots overturned, a lot of chaos in terms of people scattering and running when this violence started, and then a few arrests were made, and a few hours transpired before anything happened. I and some other journalists were at an intersection waiting to see what else would happen through the rest of the night. There were
Mike,
about 100 people.
Just connect the dots for us, because your lawyer said, I don't think it's a good idea for you to be on the stream today, but you really wanted to come on because we were talking about press freedom. Connect the dots. Why did you say, I'm coming on? Why is this important to you?
Well, because what happened in that intersection was not just what happened to me, but about 100 other people who were there in a public space were trapped, cornered, and then without warning or without reason, were pepper sprayed, beaten, dragged, arrested, and I spent 13 hours in an overcrowded jail cell covered in pepper spray.
We hear from your story why press freedom is important to you. You're a journalist, and that happened to you. We wish you the best of luck with your situation. Thank you so much. Malika, how's this conversation been going down online?
Oh, I will end this tweet from Alpine, who, hearing that story from Mike, has this to say: every single day, this administration takes steps to eliminate barriers and safeguards for personal freedoms across the board, and the press is a daily target for attacks in all directions.
So thank you to all of our guests today, and especially Margot Ewan from Reporters Without Borders. She's the North American director there. As we sign off, I'd like to share with our viewers that World Press Freedom Day hits very close to home here at Al Jazeera, where one of our network's journalists, Mahmoud Hussein, has been held in prison in Egypt for nearly 500 days. without charge. He has been kept in solitary confinement and denied his legal rights. As we say here always at this network, journalism is not a crime. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.